What's up, everybody? Big Herc 916, getting down with Fresh Out. You know how we do it over here. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, represent, and go pick you up some merch at freshoutseries.com and subscribe. You see we got the Wig Splitter limited edition t-shirts. Go pick you up one. I'm here with my friend Cody, the OG, this man, military. Man, look, I'm just gonna let him get into it because we're gonna get into some high power conversations. And yeah, get your pen and paper because you might want to take notes on this one. Cody, man, we were just talking about how all these different major industrial complexes coincide. You have the military industrial complex, you have the prison industrial complex, you have the medical industrial complex, we have the educational industrial complex. What would you like to expound on as far as in those particular institutions and how they have, you know, just covered the fabric of America and the world?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and it was great hearing you say all that stuff, man. I love your channel. I get a lot of good stuff from it, man, so it really is an honor to be sitting here and having this conversation with you, so thank you. So I look at I look at almost everything in life now through the lens of a military planner. So I was in the military for roughly 23 years, about just shy of 18 years active duty and 6 years of contracting time. And towards the end of that contracting time, I had moved into psychological operations, information operations, and military deception in support of special operations. So when I was sent to schools to learn these things, I mean, there's official like military schools that teach you how to lie, teach you how to use information, teach you how to use psychological operations. It really started opening my eyes to how these things are used against us as the people of America, right? And from a military standpoint, if you want to basically take control of an area, you have to identify key terrain. Now, key terrain isn't always Sun Tzu's Deathlands. It isn't always physical terrain on the ground. You could have assessed that the key terrain, or obviously they did assess that the key terrain, are these industrial complexes that are essentially the controllers of our society, right? So they've left no avenue uncorrupted, from your military industrial complex, which I can speak of from personal experience, you know, the media industrial complex, medical industrial complex. So they've essentially just identified those as key terrain. Like, in order to steer a population, these are the things you would have to control, right? You'd have to control what they know. You'd have to control the medicine, clearly. You'd have to control the entertainment that they see. And finally, or it was probably the very first one that went down, according to Dwight D. Eisenhower, is you have to control the military, because if you have a group of people that have a mandate to protect the Constitution and you're of a mind to start monopolizing all this stuff, it's literally the military's job to stop that type of stuff. But if they're in the pocket first, you know, what are they going to do? Is that kind of...
So when you look at, like, say for instance, the military industrial complex and how it's all propagated on war.
Yeah.
So, you know, people look at, you know, each president and they say, well, this president did this, they did that. And then it's like, oh, this guy was such a great president. But it's like, okay, well, what did he do while he was in office? And when you talk about like money being spent and who are some of the biggest contributors to the federal government, is the military industrial complex.
Right.
And so when you talk about like sway and who's in power and why do we go to these different countries and create these conflicts, and what is it benefiting? And then you come in, and then afterwards also the reconstruction, you know, the who's going to come and do the new development. It's all tied in. And then I look at like the, say, educational complex, and in order for somebody to buy into that, they got to be educated a certain way in order to be subjective to the request of those who are requesting the demands.
Right.
So, you know, if you're sitting in class and, you know, and a lot of times I used to sit around and I'm just looking at different things. And I remember one time, even math, and the teacher was explaining some problem. I can remember it was trigonometry, and he had this big drawn out, thesis of how he got to the actual mathematical equation. But I'm like, dude, well, can't we just do this and cut here? Oh, don't tell me how to teach my class. Sit down and shut up. I'm like, damn, dude, you getting all mad, but they gotta create all this to kind of keep your mind. When if you simplify a lot of things that's going on, even in life, in the world, in school, it common sense, it actually prevail and make more sense.
Right.
So you having been to school, seen the industrial complex as far as from the military side, seen the educational industrial complex, and then also witnessed combat. I mean, what do you think, like the ones at the top? What is the end game? Just power control because they have all the money.
It's definitely not the money. I think it's control. I think that our history is mostly not fabricated. I think there's a lot of good in there, but it's clearly written by winners, and it's clearly written by people with agendas, people that want power over other people, right? So I think essentially what we're dealing with when we talk about the they and all the them, and like what do they want, I think there are folks who operate in society who are essentially, we always get this idea that when civilization collapses, it's a total collapse. Well, when Rome collapses, all the bankers that were backing Caesar also collapsed. In my estimation, what these people are they are the cryptocracy that has been ruling from behind the scenes for all of time. I mean, in the second Matrix movie, you get told that there was actually 6 Matrixes before the one that they were currently in. Well, if you start looking at like Sumer, Babylon, you start looking at these different, the great societies throughout history, you could probably look at those as simply matrices that they were attempting to make that control system work for that period of time.
That's right.
And at the end of that period of time, it falls off the wheels. Like fiat currency is always going to fall off at the end because it's fake. You're not dealing with anything. So I think they've just been perfecting the art, the people that move behind the scenes, right? So, you might be the president of the country, but you're loaning money from this central bank. You might be the head of that bank, but you may not own it, right? There's always going to be the crypto leader that's hidden behind the scenes. And I think once you've got the bag, right? So a lot of us out there, that are still on the daily grind, right? You may be a little bit past living paycheck to paycheck. You maybe have a little nest egg saved up, but any kind of little thing might actually wipe you out, right? But we're talking about people who are like low-key billionaires, low-key, who the hell knows, can access trillions of dollars through a hedge fund, Those people move in silence, man. They move in secrecy. And I think the point is once you have that money and your physical needs in this reality are no longer a concern, right? I can set something in action and I can just let it like percolate. And then I can go fuck off onto a yacht somewhere and just chill out, right? In the military, we would usually work under 6-month deployment cycles. So every 6 months, a new commander comes in. That commander is a careerist, so he wants to improve what the last guy did incrementally, so he can keep getting promoted. He doesn't want to fuck anything up because this is his actual career, right? So his mindset is on 6-month periods of time. How can I do anything in this 6-month period of time? And so what happens with that is, despite the fact that whatever operation he's probably working on is just some money laundering shit anyway, there's no continuity of care, essentially. There's nobody like I've literally seen commanders come in and say, I'm not doing a fucking thing that guy did. This Army Green Beret came in, and all the Green Berets thought the SEALs were fuckboys. So they're like, hey, everything we're going to do is change in fucking day one. And as a contractor, I'm just like, I'm sort of the continuity piece in the background who's supposed to know what's going on between guys, right? But how different would it be if we were bagged up, we made a plan that we knew was going to take 10 years, right? We'd ID'd key terrain throughout the area. We ID'd people we need to get our people into. We know it's going to take 10 years. Who cares? If we're dedicated to that work and we've actually have the resources to do it, the time frame starts to not matter anymore. So who cares if it takes 100 years? Who cares if we know that we're going to have to manufacture 3 world wars to get to our end state?
Yeah.
So essentially, I think that's what we're dealing with. We see the visible symptoms of a cryptocracy, right? Like all this weird shit that we see bubbling up, man. We see it as the hamsters that are in the cage, right? We're not seeing it as the people that are setting up the entire experiment for the final end state, right? People talk about like different therapies or whatever, right? Like gene therapy type things that may or may not be being used right now. Well, in therapy, there's traditionally like an end state. Somebody might be like, "Hey, Big Herc man, you tore your meniscus. We're going to put you into physical therapy." We're not going to get you back to 100%, but we're going to get you to 80%. That's the target of our therapy, get you 80% back to working after this injury, right? Well, with all this shit that's getting pumped down into our face now is like different therapies. It's like, well, what's the end state? What are you actually driving us towards? Yeah.
Well, you made a great point there when you said that it doesn't matter if it takes 10 years or 100 years. And when you talk about people who talk about like estate planning or people who are setting up like trusts for not their kids, but their kids. And so having that luxury requires you to have a certain amount of wealth so that you can have the luxury of planning and seeing things, because when you're in the thick of things and your whole mind state is on survival mode, you don't really get the opportunity to really capitalize and take advantage of opportunities because you're constantly bombarded with just you're almost like in a dog paddle all the time. And I noticed that when I was in prison and I was reading all these different books and looking at magazines and talking to people, and I'm thinking, wow, man, it's like, okay, I'm getting out, I'm starting from zero, and I'm not like getting in, I'm not going back into a situation where I got a bunch of money put away, but I know if I get caught up in the 9 to 5, I'm never going to get out. Because once you get in, you can't get out because you only have a week or two if you get booted out that you're almost homeless. Yeah. So it's like you got to constantly stay on the hustle so that way you can always see opportunities. And I know if I'm not stuck inside somewhere, if I'm out, I can walk around the street and bump into some shit and get in it and make some shit happen. So I always had that mentality, and I always tried to put it out into the universe that, hey man, create an opportunity, allow me to meet somebody or see something that I might not see. So I always try to pay attention to my surroundings. I always try to, like, if I see something or I notice somebody with something, I'm like, well man, that guy to where he's walking, or I noticed he had a Rolex Presidential, I'm gonna hit him up and be like, hey man, I like your shirt, and try to create a conversation because there might be an opportunity, but you gotta pay attention. But if you're, like I said, if you're so caught up on just trying to survive, you're not gonna be able to see that. So I always say, hey, take a step back and try to surveillance your perimeter so that you can get a better idea of what you're looking at. And then the other thing is too, being able to, which goes back to the medical, is being healthy. Because my whole thing when I was in prison, like, damn, dude, I always knew about food and I was pretty good on my diet. I, read a lot about nutrition, and here I am, I got top ramen, tuna fish, squeezed cheese, beef sausages that are preservative. I'm like, man, so I was always trying to, do steal shit out the kitchen, boiled eggs, oatmeal, peanut butter, fruit. I was always trying to get this, so at least I'd have at least the basics of what would appear to be a decent nutritional intake, so that I can keep my body healthy, so that I can think clearly. Because if you're pumped up on sugar, preservatives, soda pop, all this shit, you're basically killing yourself from the inside out. And one of the first things or major things in prison that caused the prison to break down from the inside out is food. People do a food strike, and it's just like in the military. I know you guys, people living out and they're like, dude, if we're not eating, how are we going to go to war? How are we going to be able to fight and think about, serving, when it's like, dude, you're feeding the shit.
I mean, it's funny that you brought that up, because out at deployed sites, I mean, that's the stuff that always comes in the care packages, or that's the stuff when they're bringing out things to you. That's what I've had Otis Spunkmeyer muffins and Pop-Tarts dropped to me by parachute. And both those things are complete garbage. Like Pop-Tarts, like blue number 40 and like red number whatever. It's like all high fructose corn syrup. It's all fucking garbage. It's all like high carb sugar, right? And same thing with the Otis Spunkmeyer muffins. And at the time, we're conditioned, so we're like, oh man, we're getting a treat out here. It's like, I got to fight this fucking guy for my life, and then I got to deal with whatever this is doing to my insides, right?
Yeah.
And then not to mention whatever is in the military rations that we eat, where they tell you straight up, like, you should only eat those for a certain amount of days, So it's funny how the prison complex and the military complex both sort of target the troops with this garbage, target their people with garbage shit.
And they experiment with the food because those same rations, they gave them to us for a while, and they wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah.
And after about like a week, all the guys, the shot callers got together and said, you know what, we're not coming out the cells. And they were like, well, the military's eating this. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you guys. And that was a test. They were trying to see what was the breaking point. And so everybody refused to come out the cells, and they unlocked the door, and they're like, what's going on? Hey, come out. And then they're like, okay, they went and locked them back. You guys want to play games? And so then they went, tried to scare us a little bit, didn't feed us for like 24 hours, then brought in little sack lunches, old ass fruit, old ass stale sandwiches. And then, hey, you want to come out? Nobody came out. Then they shook the place down, and they said, the next time, we're going to start shipping people across the country. We're going to really turn this thing up. And then what they did was they went back to the shot callers after about a couple, like probably going on 2 weeks. And then everybody like, oh, we're going to come out ourselves. And then you go into the kitchen, they got chicken and watermelon. I said, man, I'm like, wow, man, this is a social experiment. But then what they do on lockdowns? Remember, you can only buy 2 meats.
Okay.
Chicken or hamburger. Out here in California, they had lines. I went to Ralph's over here in the valley. There was a line of people. They had arrows, just like in prison, walking a straight line. Yeah. Straight line in the kitchen. It's the same shit, walk this way. So I'm looking like, what this? So my wife's got to act like she's not with me so she can get 2 more pieces of meat. You know what I mean? This is the type of bullshit, prison bullshit they're doing on the street during this fucking lockdown. Then I said, you know what? We're going to drive to Malibu. I went to Malibu. I said, I'm going to try something. I just put a bunch of meat in my cart. Ding, ding. I'm like, what the fuck? This shit is some bull. Yeah. Dude, that showed me this game is... These people this shit is crazy, bro.
And that's what I really like about linking up and having these conversations is because you're unique, not unique, but like it's your ability to recognize that tactic that was used on the inside is now being used on you here in the streets. And you can point to people like, hey, that's exactly what they did to us in prison, right? And so from a military planner standpoint, I can be like, this is target conditioning. We're being target conditioned. Like the psychological operations that we use overseas are being used here. The amplification of messages, the de-amplification of messages. So, now if we can get, another homie that's steeped in the medical, he can be like, hey man, if we can start identifying the tactics that are being used against us and sharing them across the board, hey man, not everybody's gonna listen, man. And it is what it is for them. I fucking wish them the best, man. But for those of us who are hip to the game, man, if enough of us start talking about this together, we'll probably get smoked. But like, and it's cross-functional. It was a witness from the prison. It was a witness from the medical. If somebody from the entertainment industry is like, yeah, this is all bad over here. And people see enough of us talking together, and it might be enough to actually get them to start looking into these things.
Well, too, Cody, not to cut you off.
There you go.
But another thing they should trip people out is like, Herc, what are you talking to them white dudes about?
Right.
I'm like, what are you talking about? Hey man, the brothers over there said you was over there at the white dude cell over there, and you was over there for like 2 hours. Damn. Y'all keeping tabs on how long I was over there talking? What were y'all talking about? What is he, that dude, what is he in there for, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what are you guys talking about? You gonna hook up when you get out? Ooh. So, see, they don't like conversation. Right. In prison, the whole thing is to keep each race separate, so no one race has any sense of relationship to the other. And I was able to cross a lot of that off because of helping people in a law library and because of just my previous travels, and people were kind of cool because of how I carried myself. So I would talk to like the Filipino dude, the Guamanian guy, the white guy who's maybe, quote unquote, somebody would say he's a skinhead, or this guy over here, he was like, South Side, or this guy over here who's a Norteño, or this guy over here, he's from Chicago, he was the vice lord. I was able to talk to all these guys, and I'm like, dude, we have a lot more in common, and there's some very sharp dudes. And what I used to try to do when I was in prison, I'd be like, you know, hey man, I heard this. My guy was telling me this. Oh man, that's some bullshit. I said, dude, walk the track with us for an hour after lunch. Walk the track, and so he can tell you himself, because I don't like to give secondhand information. And this guy's very sharp. And I would put this black guy with this white guy who never, and they would talk, and we'd walk. And dude, it's like, it would be crazy, because like, wow, man, because now you're listening to somebody you wouldn't listen to that you never even talked to.
Right.
And this guy, and because we're in prison, we're all in the same area, but on the street, you would never be able to talk to this guy, because you would never be in the vicinity of a person like that to have this conversation. And that's one of the things I used to do all the time. And I had these groups, and I would always, you know, we'd always get together and hear just different perspectives, different viewpoints. And that's what we need to get back more to on the street. Like how we're talking now and having an intelligent conversation, but being able to see what you've experienced and what I've experienced, and coming together and saying, damn, dude, it was the same people formulating, but this is how it all came together.
So military runs off a lot of handbooks. They're called joint publications. And the joint publication for information operations, I'm slowly starting to forget all this shit. I believe it's 3 TAC 13 or 3 TAC 14. But there's a sub-publication of that called psychological operations. And within there, it specifically states that large groups of people are hard to message to. If I'm going to try to send a message to all of Iraq, okay, right? So what you want to do is you want to break down your target audience into the smallest groups of people possible. So that way you can tailor those messages specifically to them, right? And basically get a better measure of effectiveness, right? I'm not just blasting it all over Iraq. I'm getting it directly to these people. And another thing about psychological operations, by doctrine, it's true and untrue information used to push an agenda, right? So I can't have it be total fucking lies, or else you're going to know, right? So I have to wrap it in something that seems true, but nudges you towards to where I'm going, right? So I think since prison is such a controlled environment, they can break you down into subgroups, right? Because you outnumber the guards. I mean, it ain't nothing but a thing to take that fucker over, right? Like I mean, I don't know, I've never been in there, but
no, you're exactly right. And I would conduct these experiments myself, where I would like look at like just what's going on, and I would just try to fathom the mentality, right? Like, these guys are cold gangsters, right? Guys who are maybe laundering money, big drug dealers, running, corporate fraud, embezzlement, whatever they were doing. But they've now accepted that the government has won, and they're content with watching Good Morning America, the NFL, BET, the Spanish channel, and just not even fighting. I would come from the law library, and at night there would be maybe 10 of us over there, 12, 15 guys, and I'd come back and at recall, and it would be everybody be sitting around eating top ramen and looking at the TV. Nobody questioning their environment. And I'm like, wow, man, what if they said everybody, you're free to go tomorrow? How many people would go to check if it was real, or if they would be waiting for a date? See what I'm saying? People already programmed for a date. Every day I used to go up there, and guys would make fun of me. Oh, Big Herc, did you find a way out? Did you find a way out? While you're feeding your mouth with honey buns and whatever else you're eating, but at least I'm learning something. Right. I'm trying to figure out, no, I'm not out yet, dumbass. I'm still here with your dumbass, but at least I'm trying. What are you doing?
I think there's these crypto rulers that we're talking about. I think they've essentially set up reality tunnels to catch highly motivated individuals, right? The continuity between prisoners and dudes in the military is, at a certain point in time, you were highly motivated, you were ready to take risks, you were ready to go the extra mile, right? And it's funny because people in the military are like, you're comparing us to criminals. I'm like, yeah, because you fucking are criminals. But like, so if I've got the bag, if I'm like the crypto ruler, I have to set up like reality tunnels to get rid of young males. Like, we can't really do Aztec shit anymore, where we just kill 80,000 people and put them down the tunnel to get rid of them, right? Or down the pyramid. So you need to set up reality tunnels to catch these high-powered dudes. And it's interesting that when they end up in prison, they continue the the segregation piece to keep them from getting together. They don't want high-powered dudes with intellects and a penchant for action to actually get together, which is funny because in the military, there's a lot of stories out there where there's racism in the military. Yeah, sure, there's racism everywhere, man. But like, the military is a good microcosm where you can see races working together, and on special operations teams, there's no racism, man. It's like, you have guys that come from different backgrounds, right? So yeah, sure, maybe some guy came from the hills of Texas, right, and never even saw a black dude until he came to the military. But now, hey man, like, we're in a gunfight together because we're all in the same class. It's they've leveled the playing field between all of us. We know how much each other make. There's no more competition between any of us. And now the only competition is who's going to be better on this mission. Like, oh man, Big Hurt kicks ass on missions. I'm gonna try to get to the objective faster than he does this time, right? It's like there's no real racial divide at that point. But the trick to the military is that essentially you're locked into either being an officer, which you can't get out of unless you resign or fucking quit or get kicked out, or by enlisted, you're stuck every 4 years, man. So no matter how hard you work in the military, you're not making any more money, right? It's they might give you a shiny ribbon, they might give you another stripe, but we can go on the DoD website and see exactly how much money each rank makes, and that's all you're gonna fucking make that year. And so people get the same mentality that it's the lifer mentality that those guys eating top ramen just looking at this shit. You got guys who are like IT geniuses, mechanical geniuses, hyper athletes, especially when you get into like your tier 1 dudes. These are guys who should be entrepreneurs. They should be out there making $1 million. But the problem with the military guys is they have a high moral threshold, right? It's highly moral. So we got to get rid of guys who are fucking highly moral with a lot of upward potential, because we know once you get to a certain level, they're going to bump you with some immoral shit. If you want to keep moving up, you can't be this moral guy, right? So we create a reality tunnel that sidelines a bunch of moral, tough, aggressive dudes for maybe up to 20 years. We get that guy the fuck out of here for 20 years, right? The flip side is, if I'm a crypto ruler, I got to get the guys in prison, because if you got a lot of energy and you're willing to go out and take some shit to improve your life, well, after a certain amount of time, moving up through there, you're probably not going to retire and stop taking shit. You're eventually going to start setting your targets on the big fish.
Yeah, you're right, man. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you said something, it just kind of resonated. When you said 20 years, and that's the average time when they get these youngsters who are like these high-powered gang members, and they're not stupid.
No.
These dudes are sharp, man. Some of these dudes, I would hear them like read stuff and talk about stuff or be in a law library. I'm like, damn, this dude right here, he's a cold gangster. Ain't he the killer? But if he was in corporate America, he'd be a boss.
Yeah.
He'd be tearing up shit, and he's physically strong. This mother, he'll knock a dude out. So those people, like you said, are threats unless they feel somehow they can sideline you or compromise you. And and it's like funny, because even like I can recall, like when I used to go in certain circles, I would actually try to downplay my physical presence by the way I talk or my body, so people wouldn't be as intimidated when I would go to certain circles. And then I know when I'm in the hood, I can relax and be a different type of person. So I almost had to try to, play on my physical presence and my voice projection, because my wife's like, oh, you talk loud, you scare people. Because I get amped up, so yeah. I have to be conscious of that. They're like, oh, you don't realize how loud you're talking, and I'm like, and then I'm used to who my body is, but for maybe somebody outside looking in, it's like, oh man, that big black, I hope he's not one of those violent guys. I've seen him on the news. Those guys are and so, it's a weird thing, man, but I know exactly what you're talking about. So these little funnels, man, it's almost ingenious, man, because I know, when I see in prison, I'm like, I got played, man. When I really start reading the law, and I would go back and lay in my bunk like, oh, man, I should have stayed my ass in school. What am I thinking? And I would have conversations with people, and I'm like, I'm not like these people. I'm not saying I'm better, but I'm seeing things, and they don't see it. They just think that they should be here. I'm like, dude, I made a mistake, but this shit is not legit. It doesn't add up. And I'm like, so it was I don't know. I sometimes think, why couldn't I have missed that day of going to rob the bank? But I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't be the conscious person that I am today. And I had to go through that experience, even though it was just like, it seemed like it was forever. And it's like, I try to, like, hopefully, think like, how could I've gotten that type of knowledge or insight without going through that? And I play with that thought every day. And when I put out videos, sometimes I try to figure out how I can resonate that to other young people, without having them having experienced that. But I think, I don't know, can you actually perceive something without having the experience? Because, otherwise that would be, quote unquote, maybe just a rapper. Rappers talk about a lot of shit and they never experienced
Studio
it.
gangsters.
Studio gangsters.
Yeah.
So, it's almost like an oxymoron, man. You have to have lived some of this stuff in order to be able to look back and realize what's real and what's not.
I've come to the same realization about my military time. I mean, as a young Marine, you couldn't have told me shit about the global war on terror, right? Like, my head was in the game. I believed the narrative that I was told, right? And so I was like a true believer. And then what I personally needed for my spiritual growth was to see this shit firsthand, right? To actually stand in another person's country and be asking them, ask some farmer where the terrorists are, and he's like, "You motherfucker, you're the terrorist. Like, you don't live here. You're terrorizing my family right now, right?"
Yeah.
And I think if you're open to listening to this reality that we live in, it will show you things. And I think that it was showing me things continually throughout my career to wake me up. So the first one that I can distinctly remember is I was sitting in Baghdad. We just attacked this building called the Ministry of Intelligence building. It was like this is 2003. It's like a big ass 13-story mushroom shaped like fucking building, right? Long story short, the Iraqis mostly just surrendered. So we ran in there like the Mohicans and shit, ready to just like blow doors off the hinges. We drove a tank through the wall and the fucking place is empty, right? But so I'm sitting on the front steps of that place smoking a cigarette, and I'm watching across Baghdad like a 10-story building just burn. And it burned all night. And I'm looking at it in my mind now like, oh yeah, man, skyscrapers don't fall down from fire. Like, that doesn't happen like that, right? So then, fast forward, and I'm in like the second battle of Fallujah, and it's one of these things where we have to go in and smash Fallujah because they killed these contractors and they hung them up. It's like, well, I mean, if you look back to the Blackwater thing, contractors driving around Iraq weren't exactly the good guys, They're opening fire on motherfuckers, and I'm like, hey, we all remember this is Iraq, right? Like, this is their country. So they paint Fallujah as this viper's nest of terrorists. It's like, oh man, maybe they're just tired of your contractors fucking running people off the road and forcing everybody to get out of the way. I mean, this is their fucking city, right? So that was one of the things I looked at from Fallujah, and just, walking around in that city once the major combat was done, and you see, just people's belongings and things. I'm like, these are just folks, man, just folks trying to fucking live. And so you fast forward and make it into Afghanistan in 2007. And so now the story is, and we got this big brief as we were going on this mission from the company commander, who was a schmuck. Like, we're in Afghanistan. This is the heart of the Taliban. These are the guys that are responsible. Like, in my brain, I should have been like, bro, there was no Afghans on the 9/11 anything. Like, allegedly what happened was people came here and planned some shit. So that'd be like if I planned some shit next to your house, you had nothing to do with it, and then SWAT comes and raids you too. You're like, hey man, that wasn't my fault. These assholes were here planning shit.
Yeah.
But so I go into this village one day, and it's just, it's hot as balls, man. These people don't have a literal no pot to piss in and literal no window to throw it out of because it's a mud hut, right? And we bang on the door. We're looking for terrorists, man. Like, we're looking for the Taliban, right? And you don't got to look for them. If you park in one space long enough, they find you. So the man comes to the door, and I have the translator. Dude, I was trying to be as respectful as possible. I actually told this analogy to somebody earlier, where like my gruff exterior sort of like maybe made me look like the Tin Man or some shit, but I really do have a huge heart. And so it kind of I can see the look on this guy's face that I'm fucking his whole day up, right? So like, man comes to the door, I tell the Terp, like, hey, can you please ask him to have the women and children off in a certain place? Plus, if the guy started acting hinky when he came to the door, I'd be like, all right, well, fuck it, we're just gonna climb over the wall while he goes back inside. But so the guy does his shit, opens the door, and we move in there, and we start like processing the area. Dude, they have like a little fire that's, you know, a tiny little fire, you know, just for cooking and making their morning chai and shit, dude. A chicken with no feathers runs by me. It looks like a fucking lizard, like a dinosaur. And I'm like, fuck. So we're going from room to room. They don't really have doors. They have like blankets over Yoda's house. It'd be like Yoda's door and then blanket over the front, right? So I go over to this door and this little girl runs over and like almost kind of stops me from going in the door. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. But then she goes in first. I'm like, okay, well, if she's going in there, I'm probably not going to eat a fucking AK burst, you know? So I follow her in and there's a little boy on the ground, dude. And he's like naked from the waist down and you can clearly tell he's fucking sick. And so the little girl goes to start trying to get him up, and I don't speak Pashtun, man. So like she's gonna drag him outside. And so I just kind of gave her like a little hand and arm signal, and be like, no, he's good. Like leave him. It's fucking a million degrees outside, you know. Leave him here in the shade. It's all good. And what that should have showed me, I'm like, let me get this straight. The narrative is, these people were gonna cross. Not only it's a landlocked country, they were gonna cross land, and then they were going to cross the entirety of the fucking Atlantic Ocean, like past all of our NATO allies, to come here and conquer America. Like terrorists were coming to conquer America. I'm looking at these people, I'm like, they haven't even conquered electricity.
Wow.
They got nothing, man. And so like that was one of the things where I was looking at and I was like, fuck, man, this is bullshit. So I mean, there was a bunch of those throughout the time. So finally, like in 2019, I was in a war zone, and you know, looking through operations reports, trying to like weave around classification shit. So essentially, what went down was there were terrorists out in the desert that this Green Beret team was going to go get with the local nation's high-powered dudes, right? I was in Iraq. I don't think that really makes a difference, but so in the middle of the night, this Green Beret SIF team, which is like the Commanders and Extremist Force, they're kind of like a task force that would be kind of considered like right below Tier 1, right? It's like if Tier 1 is Black Soft, then like your Commanders and Extremist Force is like Gray Soft. It's a Green Beret team that has received more training and more gear because there ain't but so many Tier 1 dudes, right? And that, like you can't have those dudes flying all over the place. So like they're the next best option.
Okay.
They have an in-theater closer response time than dudes that are going to come from like Fort Bragg or some shit. So they're going to take their Iraqi counterparts out and roll these people up, right? I'm like, okay, cool. So basically I'm kind of sitting in the operations area waiting to fucking assist in whatever I can do, right? Some of the things that we would do for stuff like that is if, for example, somebody saw a social media post that was like, hey, I just heard fucking helicopters or something like that, we would have the ability to make that not show up. Or we may have the ability to, you know, maybe we have somebody on there saying, hey, this is just a training exercise. They do that shit all the time, right? So these guys go out there. They take out 3 Air Force Ospreys, the tilt rotor planes, right? AFSOC, so Air Force Special Operations Ospreys. So shit tons of gear are going out there, right? And what happens when they get there is one of the Ospreys has a hard landing and basically like breaks the tail of it. So that thing's got to limp back to another base because it's pretty much non-operational at this point, other than the fact that it can still fly. So there goes a fucking chunk of money, right? Not to mention all the money it takes just to put these guys on the target. So they roll up the people, they come back, and one of the things I would do is I would go through all of the exploitation material that the guys bring off target to look for things that we could use for information operations, to look for things that we could use for sensitive operations. I mean, if I'm trying to trick somebody to take a piece of gear from me, what better than shit that came right from the country, right? So I'm looking through the report, and what they brought off that target was like 2 old women and like an 18-year-old kid and like a shotgun and like a cell phone.
Oh my God.
That wasn't even theirs. And so I'm sitting there looking at this shit. I'm like, the whole reason all this stuff, the whole reason the military classifies everything that's going on in the war on terror isn't because it's things that would be like wildly interesting technology shit. It's just basically, they probably don't want people asking like, hey, after 20 years, you're sending, however many $1 million worth of tech equipment, American lives, to roll up these three people. Like, that's what the fuck is going on. So I would look at that, and I'm just like this is. That was kind of like the last straw. So that was like 2019 timeframe where I was like, I'd finally seen enough. I'd done everything from a private in the Marine Corps to being on a Special Operations Joint Staff in Iraq as part of the 06, the colonels or the Navy captains advisory team, right? So it took me going to take this thing whole circle. It took me all of that time to finally be like, okay, this is fucking nonsense. This is a scam. This is the military-industrial complex conducting money laundering operations.
You know, and to wrap that up, what you just said about them getting an old lady, a teenage boy with a shotgun, and another person, I would sometimes look at like the guys they got and sitting in prison with all this time, and I'm thinking like how much money they spent to investigate these guys and to surveillance, and they built this big case up. How much money they spent. I'm like, for real, to get this guy? And you guys are justifying this guy, you're giving him all this time, and I'm looking at this guy's harmless. He's harmless, man. This guy, he eats his honey buns, he watches his TV, he plays his, he wants to go up and listen to his music or play a video game. I'm like, what is going on? And I'm looking at dude, how much money was spent locking up all these people when there could have been 1,000 other options? If you didn't murder somebody, why are they all sitting in here? And I look at the same thing, man. So there's a lot of parallels, man, and we're going to get into it in some other videos. But man, it's like you said, it's classified not because of the high-powered level of who they captured, but because of their covering up how much money they spent to get nothing.
Right.
There you have it, Big Herc 916 and Cody getting down on Fresh Out. You tired of smelling like stanky butt, funky armpits? Wash your ass. Go to FreshOutSeries.com and pick you up a bar of soap.